The twin suns of Verdant Prime cast long shadows across the endless wheat fields, painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold. Mara Hendricks wiped the sweat from her brow, her calloused hands gripping the worn handle of her harvesting tool. The agricultural mech beside her hummed softly, its sensors scanning the ripening crops that stretched to the horizon. This was her world, quite literally. 3 generations of Hendricks had cultivated this land, transforming the once barren planet into a breadbasket for 3 star systems. Mara's grandfather had been among the first settlers, arriving when Verdant Prime was nothing more than a rocky wasteland. Now, it was a critical agricultural hub, supplying grain to millions across the galactic frontier. But something felt different today. The usual hum of agricultural machinery was punctuated by an unsettling silence. The comband on Mara's wrist flickered with static, a rare occurrence in their typically robust communication network. Orbital control, this is Hendricks Farm, Sector 7. Do you copy? Mara spoke into her wrist comm, her voice steady but tinged with growing concern. Silence. She toggled through multiple frequencies, each one meeting her with the same dead air. The mech beside her began to emit a low-frequency warning pulse, its advanced AI sensing something beyond the range of human perception. In the distance, a shimmer appeared against the golden sky. At first, Mara thought it was a heat mirage, a trick of light on the vast wheat fields. But as the shimmer grew, taking on a metallic sheen, she recognized the distinctive profile of military-grade dropships. The Stellar Dominion had arrived. Mara's mind raced. The Dominion was infamous, a militaristic empire that had been systematically consuming independent planetary systems for decades. They weren't interested in negotiation or trade. They wanted resources, and they would take them by any means necessary. Her family's farm had always remained neutral, focusing on production rather than politics. But neutrality meant little to an empire that saw independent planets as nothing more than potential fuel for its expansion. The first dropship touched down, crushing several acres of wheat beneath its massive landing struts. Mara watched, a mixture of anger and calculation burning in her eyes. These weren't just crops, they were her life's work, her family's legacy. A platoon of heavily armored warriors emerged, their exosuits gleaming with advanced tactical interfaces. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall, augmented with combat-grade biotech and carrying weapons that could level entire settlements with a single burst. Mara's hand instinctively tightened around her harvesting tool, a meter-long implement designed for cutting wheat but now feeling suspiciously like a potential weapon. A commander stepped forward, his helmet's communication array broadcasting a standard Imperial demand. This is Sector Commander Voss of the Stellar Dominion. By Imperial decree, this agricultural zone is now under military requisition. Prepare for resource extraction and population relocation. Relocation. A euphemism for displacement, for the destruction of everything she and her family had built. Mara took a step forward, her weathered work boots leaving imprints in the rich soil. The harvesting tool remained in her hand, not raised as a weapon, but held with a quiet, defiant purpose. This is private property, she called back, her voice carrying across the wheat field. You're not welcome here. Commander Voss seemed momentarily taken aback. In his decades of planetary conquests, farmers typically cowered or fled. They didn't stand their ground. Little did he know, Mara Hendricks was no ordinary farmer. The first act of resistance was about to begin. The wheat field became a battlefield of stillness. Commander Voss's platoon stood in stark contrast to the golden landscape, their metallic exosuits a violent intrusion against the natural backdrop. Mara remained rooted, her harvesting tool now gripped like an improvised staff. Stand down, civilian, Voss's synthesized voice crackled through external speakers. Resistance is futile. A younger soldier in the platoon, Lieutenant Kai Remick, studied Mara through his helmet's augmented reality display. Her biosignature read as an ordinary farmer, mid-30s, physically conditioned from manual labor, no apparent military training. Yet something in her stance suggested otherwise. "Commander," Remick spoke privately through the squad's internal comm, "her body language doesn't match typical civilian response profiles." Voss dismissed the observation. "Prepare containment protocols." 3 combat drones rose from the dropship's deployment bay, their targeting systems locking onto Mara. Precision weapons designed to neutralize threats with minimal environmental damage, a cruel irony, given their intent to seize an entire agricultural ecosystem. Mara's agricultural mech, still operational in the field, suddenly hummed to life. Its standard harvesting protocols transformed, agricultural sensors recalibrating into defensive configuration. The machine had been programmed by generations of Hendricks to protect the land, and its people. "Last warning," Voss announced. "Surrender or be subdued." Instead of fear, a calculating smile crossed Mara's face. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, triggering a sequence embedded in the farm's integrated system. Underground irrigation pipes, typically used for precise crop watering, began to shift. The first drone descended, its anti-grav stabilizers preparing to emit a neutralization pulse. Suddenly, a high-pressure water jet erupted from beneath, engineered with enough force to disrupt its delicate electronic systems. The drone spiraled, crashed into the wheat, creating a small fire that quickly spread through the dry stalks. Remick's helmet computer calculated the probability of this being a coincidence, less than 0.03%. "That was no accident," he muttered. More drones approached. More water jets erupted. Each precisely timed, each targeting critical systems with surgical accuracy. This wasn't random defense, this was calculated strategy. The wheat field became a chaotic dance of water, fire, and falling technology. Mara moved with a fluidity that belied her farmer's exterior, ducking, redirecting, using the landscape as both shield and weapon. Voss's tactical overlay went haywire. Sensor readings showed impossible movements, environmental manipulation that shouldn't be feasible from a supposed civilian. "Who are you?" he demanded, switching to a direct communication channel. Mara's response was simple and direct. "I'm someone protecting what's mine." Another drone fell. Then another. Not through brute force, but through precise environmental manipulation that suggested intimate knowledge of technological vulnerabilities. Remick's analysis revealed something extraordinary. The farm's entire infrastructure, from irrigation systems to agricultural mechs, had been subtly weaponized. Each component designed with multiple potential uses, waiting for the right moment of activation. This wasn't just a farm. This was a meticulously prepared defensive system. As the last drone crashed, Mara stood amidst burning wheat and fallen technology. Her harvesting tool remained in hand, now looking less like a farming implement and more like a weapon of calculated resistance. Commander Voss realized something fundamental had changed. This wasn't going to be a simple planetary takeover. This was going to be a war. And it would be fought field by field, by a farmer who viewed her land as more than just cropland, but as a living, breathing entity worth defending. The first confrontation had ended. But the real battle was just beginning. The communication relay station on the outskirts of Verdant Prime's agricultural zone had always been a quiet outpost. Now, it buzzed with frantic energy as Mara worked to establish a network of resistance. Her harvesting tool lay disassembled on a workbench, its components now integrated with communication equipment salvaged from the fallen Stellar Dominion drones. Holographic displays flickered with maps of local farms, communication patterns, and strategic resource locations. Elena Rodriguez, the station's chief communications officer, watched in a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You're turning farm equipment into communication weapons," she muttered, half statement, half question. Mara didn't look up. Every tool has more than one purpose. Farmers learn that early. The first wave of local farmers had been skeptical. Some were terrified. Others wanted to flee. But the destruction of their wheat fields, the threat to their way of life, was slowly turning fear into resolve. Omar Khalid, who ran the largest hydroponics complex in the southern region, was the first to join Mara's impromptu war council. His massive greenhouse complex had already been partially destroyed by Dominion reconnaissance units. "They don't understand," Omar explained, spreading a holographic map of the region. "This isn't just about crops. It's about survival. These fields feed entire star systems." Lieutenant Kai Remick, the Dominion officer who had observed Mara during the initial confrontation, sat in a secured communication chamber several kilometers away. His loyalty was fracturing. The mission reports he was compiling told a story far different from the standard Imperial narrative. "Commander," he transmitted to Voss, "this isn't a simple resource acquisition. These people are preparing to fight." Voss's response was cold. "Prepare full planetary suppression protocols." Back at the communication relay, Mara was building something unprecedented. Each farmer brought unique skills. Elena's communication expertise. Omar's understanding of complex agricultural systems. Martin Way, a retired military engineer who had settled on Verdant Prime, brought tactical knowledge. "We can't fight them traditionally," Mara explained, pointing to the holographic display. "But we can make this planet impossible to conquer." The plan was audacious. They would transform the entire agricultural infrastructure into a defensive network. Irrigation systems became water cannons. Harvesting mechs would become combat platforms. Greenhouses could be sealed and weaponized. Martin studied the schematics. "This is brilliant. We're turning an entire planet's agricultural technology into a defensive system." Elena interrupted, her communication equipment picking up a critical transmission. "Dominion fleet is increasing its orbital presence. They're preparing for a full-scale invasion." The room fell silent. This was no longer about a single farm or even a single planet. This was about resistance against imperial expansion. Omar broke the silence. "How many regions can we coordinate?" Mara's finger traced the holographic map. "All of them. Every farm, every agricultural station. We'll make this planet a fortress." Outside, the first modified agricultural mechs began moving. Not for harvesting, but for defense. Wheat fields that once produced grain now prepared to produce something else entirely, resistance. Lieutenant Remick, monitoring the transmissions, made a decision. The communication he was about to send would change everything. The gathering of resistance was complete. The real war was about to begin. The horizon burned with the light of 1,000 mechanical demons. Stellar Dominion dropships descended like metallic locusts, their plasma cannons charging with deadly potential. Verdant Prime's agricultural landscape, once a peaceful breadbasket, had transformed into a battlefield of unprecedented ingenuity. Mara stood atop a modified grain silo, her communication array linked to dozens of improvised defense networks. Beside her, Omar monitored the hydroponics defense systems, while Elena managed the communication scramble that would keep the Dominion's tactical networks in chaos. "Incoming first wave," Martin announced, his fingers dancing across a modified harvester's control panel. 17 ground units, 3 aerial support platforms. The first shots weren't fired by traditional weapons. Instead, massive irrigation systems erupted, creating walls of pressurized water that destabilized incoming hover tanks. Greenhouse domes sealed and transformed, their transparent surfaces becoming reflective energy barriers that redirected plasma cannon fire. Lieutenant Kai Remick had made his choice. Instead of commanding the invasion, he now transmitted critical Dominion tactical data to the resistance. His encrypted channels revealed weakness after weakness in the Imperial assault plan. Commander Voss realized too late that this was no ordinary planetary invasion. Agricultural mechs that once harvested wheat now moved with surprising agility. Their harvesting attachments became makeshift weapons, cutting implements repurposed to slice through exosuit armor. Drone swarms, typically used for crop monitoring, now hunted Dominion reconnaissance units with surgical precision. "They're adapting faster than our tactical predictors," a Dominion tactical officer reported, panic creeping into his voice. Mara's strategy was brutally simple. The planet itself was a weapon. Every system, every piece of infrastructure, had been carefully prepared. Underground irrigation pipes became conduits for electromagnetic pulses. Fertilizer storage became improvised explosive repositories. Greenhouses transformed into defensive fortresses. Omar's hydroponics complex became a particular nightmare for the invaders. Massive water reservoirs were weaponized, creating localized electromagnetic storms that disabled entire squadron of mechs. Specialized nutrient solutions, normally used to accelerate crop growth, now served as corrosive agents against mechanical systems. The battle raged across multiple fronts. In the wheat fields, mechanical harvesters danced a deadly ballet with Dominion combat units. Orbital platforms found their targeting systems compromised, their weapons redirected or neutralized by ingenious planetary defenses. Lieutenant Remick's final transmission proved decisive. He revealed the location of the Dominion's primary command ship, a massive vessel hovering at the edge of the planet's atmosphere. One central weakness, he transmitted to Mara. Their quantum communication relay. Take it out, and their entire invasion force loses coordination. The plan came together with terrifying speed. Every agricultural system on the planet would contribute. Massive electromagnetic pulses from irrigation systems. Precision targeting from crop monitoring satellites. Redirected communication arrays. Commander Voss watched in disbelief as his invasion began to crumble. This wasn't just resistance. This was total ecological warfare. "Who are these people?" he demanded of his tactical team. The answer was simple: they were farmers. And they were fighting for their home. As the first Dominion dropships began to fall, as their once invincible technology failed against the planet's transformed defenses, a new chapter of galactic resistance was being written. Mara looked out over the battlefield. The wheat fields burned. The mechs fought. And Verdant Prime stood unbroken. The silence was more deafening than the battle had been. Verdant Prime lay scarred but unbroken. Burnt wheat fields mixed with the remains of fallen Dominion technology, creating a landscape that was part battlefield, part farmland. Mara walked among the wreckage, her harvesting tool now more symbol than weapon. In the days following the conflict, the galactic community took notice. What had begun as a simple planetary invasion had become something far more significant, a turning point in how resistance could be mounted against imperial expansion. Lieutenant Kai Remick sat in a provisional hearing, his testimony sending shockwaves through the stellar Dominion's military hierarchy. They weren't just defending a planet, he explained to the Interstellar Tribunal. They were protecting a way of life. Every system, every piece of technology was a testament to their resilience. Omar's hydroponics complex, despite heavy damage, had already begun reconstruction. Rows of new plants emerged from the scorched earth, a living metaphor of renewal and hope. Elena worked to broadcast their story across multiple star systems, ensuring that the resistance of Verdant Prime would not be forgotten. Martin Way, the retired military engineer, compiled a comprehensive analysis of their defensive strategies. Academic institutions and resistance movements across the galaxy began studying their tactics, how a group of farmers had effectively defeated one of the most powerful military forces in known space. Commander Voss faced a tribunal of his own. The complete failure of the invasion, coupled with Lieutenant Remick's testimony, meant more than just a military defeat. It represented a fundamental challenge to the Dominion's approach to planetary acquisition. They turned agriculture into warfare, Voss said during his hearing, a mixture of grudging respect and disbelief in his voice. Every irrigation pipe, every harvesting mech became a weapon. Mara found herself in an unexpected position. What had started as a defense of her family's farm had become a galactic statement of resistance. Representatives from independent planetary systems began reaching out, seeking to understand how they had achieved the impossible. "We didn't have the most advanced weapons," Mara would later say in interviews. "We had something more powerful. We understood our land. We knew every pipe, every system, every inch of soil. Our technology wasn't about destruction, it was about sustenance. About life." The Stellar Dominion's aggressive expansion had been dealt a significant blow. Not by a military force, but by farmers who refused to be conquered. As the first new crops began to grow in the rebuilt fields, a different kind of message was being sent. This wasn't just about survival. This was about the right to exist, to cultivate, to choose one's own path. Lieutenant Remick, now working with the newly formed Planetary Sovereignty Coalition, reflected on the battle. "They didn't just defend a planet," he noted in his final report. "They redefined what resistance means. Verdun Prime became more than a planet. It became a symbol. In the communication relays, in the rebuilt greenhouses, in the fields slowly returning to life, a new story was being written. A story of how ordinary people could stand against extraordinary challenges. A story of how the tools of creation could become the instruments of defense." The wheat continued to grow. The farmers continued to work. And the galaxy watched and learned.